Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all to the 14th lecture of the course Management Organizational Policies and Practices. Before moving on to the contents of this lecture, I would like to give you a recap of lecture 13. So for the lecture 13, we had a discussion on how the information is managed in the organizations, what are the best ways to manage the information, and what were the old ways of managing information and what are the new ways of managing information. We started off with the distinction between the raw data and the information, and we saw that how the raw data becomes useful when it can be applied meaningfully in the decision-making process. Right, and then we saw the different characteristics of useful information. We saw that information is useful only when it is complete, right? Incomplete information is not useful because it does not give us a complete picture, and the managerial decision making may not be at optimal level. Then we also saw that information is useful when it is reliable. Of course, when it is coming from an authentic source, only when it is validity and reliability of the information is certain, only then that information is useful. If the information is not reliable or it's not coming from a good source, then that information again is not useful. Then another criteria of useful information that we discussed was the accuracy of the information. That how accurate that information is. If that again that information is not accurate, then what decisions that the manager is going to make are going to be faulty, and they are more prone to mistakes. Then we had a discussion that the timely information is useful information. If we do not receive the information on time, again we'll be at the time of the decision making, we'll be making decisions that would be that might be faulty and that might be prone to more mistakes. So if we are receiving information after we have made our decisions or after the deadlines have passed, then that information is not useful. Then we saw that the information, there are certain costs which are attached to gaining the useful information. So information gathering and information assembly and processing and the utilization of the information, all those different processes of obtaining of the information till the decision making and the process of the information, etc., all those processes, they come with costs, right? There are certain costs of this information, of the useful information. So the first cost is the acquisition cost, that is the cost of acquiring the information. When you have to obtain the information, there are certain costs attached to the obtainment of that information, and I gave you the example of the State Bank of Pakistan here. What the State Bank does and how do the different banks, they benefit from the different reports that are generated by the State Bank, right? You could also come up with a number of other examples that when you have to get some information, the cost that you have to incur. For example, just take the example of getting a survey done, a questionnaire done. You want to get certain information, so there is some acquisition cost to get that questionnaire or to get that information from some questionnaires. You need to have put in some costs, such as the traveling costs. It can be right cost of printing of the papers for the questionnaire, right, and the cost of providing the raw material or the other stuff to the potential respondents, right, and then the cost of traveling back, etc. So there can be a number of costs that can be attached to this acquisition of information. Then the second type of cost that we discussed was the processing cost. So the cost that is attached to process the information that you have acquired, right? And the processing cost that can be, for example, in the case of that questionnaire, it could be that when you have obtained all the questionnaires, now you have to process that information. You have to enter them, if you have obtained those questionnaires manually, you have to enter them into your system, right? And you have to process all that information, categorize all that information. So all that is the processing cost. And then we discussed the storage cost, that where you have to store that information. If you have to keep those questionnaires or those surveys manual and you have to do your analysis manually, then again you need some storage space for them. And there's some storage costs attached, right? The cost of the warehouse, for example, or if you have to put them in their software, then it can be the cost of a computer, it can be the cost of the software, or any other application software that you are going to run. So all those costs are going to be there for storing. There all the storage costs where you have to store your information, right? And then the retrieval costs, we discussed that when you have to, how you have to retrieve the information that you have stored, right? When if it is saved stored manually, then that retrieval process of the retrieval would be different, the costs would be different. And if you have electronically stored your information in your various devices, or then your retrieval costs, they would be different. And then the communication cost, how the information is communicated from one party or one person to the other person, there are again certain costs that are attached to this communication, right? Then we had a discussion on the strategic importance of information, and there we discussed that how the information or information technology, it is only a competitive advantage, or it is only an edge, or it is only useful for the managers only when it can be strategic, only when it is strategic, right? It has some strategic importance, and the information has the strategic importance only when it is creating some value for the customers, some added value for the customers. And we had a discussion that how the information technology can provide value to the customers only when that information technology that are being used by your company, it is not being used by the other companies. They don't have that information technology. If they also have it, then it will be competitive parity, and how that information needs to be valued by the by your customers, right? And if that is not valued by the customers in terms of the either it is at the much lower cost than your competitors, or it is in better quality than your competitors, if it is none of these two, then it won't be adding any value in the eyes of the customers, and then again that information technology may not be useful, and it may not be strategic, and it may not provide any strategic advantage for the company. And then we also had a discussion on this resource-based view of information technology, that information technology would lead you to a sustainable competitive advantage only when that is used by only when that is rare, and that is not imitable by your competitors, right? And so there were a few characteristics of the information technology which can lead the company to the strategic strategic competitive advantage over the other companies. And we also had a discussion on this first mover advantage, that how the first movers, they obtain much greater share of the market compared to the followers. But we also discussed that since the information technology costs are much higher during the initiation period or during the early periods, that is why the products that are the first movers bring into the market, they are normally higher priced, and since the information technology, its price falls very fastly, and the IT also becomes obsolete fastly. Therefore, the costs attached to this information technology, they also decline very quickly, and the followers, they take an advantage of entering the market with the same product but at a much lower price, right? So in that kind of cases, how the first movers, they can face losses, or they can sometimes the losses can be so high that they have to run out of the business. Then we had a discussion on capturing the information, that how the information is captured, what are the different ways of capturing the information. We had a discussion of that. It is captured manually, and it is captured electronically. And under electronic capture, we saw that it is captured through the barcodes, and it is captured through the electronic scanners, and both of these devices, they're very frequently used, the electronic scanners and the barcodes. The barcodes often in the retailing outlets and in the shops, you see that all the scanning is done through the barcodes, and in the electronic scanners that we also frequently use, scan our documents, to scan different images, etc., right? And then we saw that how the storing of information, again, it can be done manually or it can be done electronically. And electronic ways of storing the information are microfilm that we discussed in detail. We discussed the CD-ROM, DVD and other option. Then we had a discussion on the data storage tapes, and we discussed that how and when these storage tapes are used, primarily when the secondary data managers, they need to archive that. Then these storage tapes are used, and we also discussed that how hard drives are used by the managers and how they are the fastest source of the retrieval of the information. And that is why the managers, they normally keep the primary data in the hard drives, right? Because that is easily and fastly accessible, right? So we had a discussion on the advantages and disadvantages of these different storage devices, and then we had a discussion on how the information is processed. We saw that companies normally use three different ways of processing the information. One is the centralized processing, the other one is the distributed processing, and the last one is the shared processing. And how in the centralized processing is done through the mainframes, and the distributed processing is done through the individual computers, the desktops that are provided to the every individual, and the shared processing is done through the network servers, etc. So we also saw that when do the companies, or which companies, use which types of systems or the processing, how do they process information, different companies. And we saw that mainly or commonly the large companies, they use these mainframes because they have huge amount of data and information, and which they need to process. So they use the mainframes, and the smaller companies, they more rely on the distributed and the shared processing, but the large companies rely on a combination of all these three different types of processing. Then we lastly saw that accessing and sharing of the information and knowledge, how there are different modes of communication and sharing of knowledge and information, and how it is accessed. We discussed a number of ways, such as emails, the advantages and disadvantages of emails, and we also saw that voicemail, how it is an advantage for the companies or for the managers. And we also had a discussion on the different teleconferencing options, the document sharing and the application sharing, etc. So this was our lecture for on managing information, and today we start with our 14th lecture, which is on control. So after this lecture, you should be able to describe the basic control process. You should be able to answer the question, is control necessary or possible? You should be able to discuss the various methods that managers can use to maintain control, and you should be able to describe the behaviors, processes, and outcomes that today's managers are choosing to control their organizations. So before starting with the control process, I would like to give you a very brief understanding if some of you are a little confused about what do we mean by control. So I hope it's clear to you that what we are meaning by control. Control is basically the process in the when we talk about managing strategically, or when we talk about the management in the organizations. Of course, the first step is that when you are doing your strategic planning at the top, and then you are formulating your plans, and then you're setting your goals and targets, your objectives, your vision and mission statement. According to your vision and mission statement, you set your targets and goals and priorities and how you have to achieve them, right? So the different strategies that you need to achieve them, and then you implement those plans at the different levels, right? So there are intermediate plans, there are the top level plans, and there are the bottom level plans, right? And so at all these different levels, those plans are implemented to fulfill the organizational goals and objectives, right? So when those plans are implemented, then you also need to see that you need to evaluate whether those plans have been implemented successfully, or how far, what is the effectiveness of your strategies or for your plans to achieve your goals, right? Whether you're short of your goals or not, right? And how you have to control the performance, or how you have to control in the different functions in the organization as managers, to achieve your outcomes. So the control can be in a number of directions. That can be the how you have to control your output, how you have to control the quality, how you have to control the performance of employees, their behaviors, right? So it can be about the processes, it can be about the design, so it can be about a number of things. So it is that how, in what areas your performance is deficient and how you have to control it or how you have to correct your performance. So it is basically an evaluation of your policies, if there is any discrepancy between the intended organizational policies and practices and the implemented organizational policies and practices. And if there are some differences, then how you have to address those differences. What are the corrective actions that you need to take? What are the changes in your strategy, for example, that you need to make, right, to or how you need to control certain areas, right? So this is control basically, right? So the control process, it begins with establishment of clear standards of performance, right? Then it involves a comparison of actual performance to desired performance. It takes corrective action to repair performance deficiencies. It is a dynamic cybernetic process, and it consists of feedback control, concurrent control, and feed-forward control. So this is the control process basically. We're going to discuss this process stepwise in our upcoming slides. So first, we said that control, it is about establishing clear standards of performance, right? So first, of course, you need to have certain standards, and only against those standards you will be judging your performance, or you will be judging your outcomes, and then seeing that where and how much control is required, right? So you need to set your standards, right? That what you have to do. For example, McDonald's, it has set a standard that it should make the services to the clients, or it should fulfill the customer demands or customer requests, or the order that the customers have placed. It should that should be met within 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes, right? So that is the standard that the McDonald's has set for its customer service. So you need to have a standard, right? First you set a standard. Now how you will see that what standard you need to set. How do you set those standards? That is the question, right? There are a few criteria on how you can set the standards. One, your standards that you set, they need to be in line with your goals. That is, this standards should be set in a way that it should be ensured that your organizational goals and objectives are being met, or meeting those standards should mean that organizational goals are being met. So Chrysler, for example, it was producing. It gave you the example of Chrysler, or I think before as well in one of my lectures, that how it, despite producing at lower cost than its competitors, it was losing on its market share and profitability because it was not producing the differentiated or good designs of its products, right? And that is why it was not able to gain its market share and profitability, and it was not able to achieve its goal, although it was meeting the standard of producing at lower cost. So we also have another example of Best Buy, which is a seller of electronic products and electronic appliances. So they basically started off with their no receipt policy. When you have to return the products or goods that you buy from the company, the customers were not required to produce the payment slip or the receipt of payment of the products that they had bought when they wanted to return those goods, or when they wanted to exchange those goods at the counter. So what it led was that it led to the reduced profits for the Best Buy, because some of the customers, what they would do is that they would just pick up the goods from the shelves, and they would show them up at the counter, and they would tend to return those goods even without purchasing those goods, but there was no check on whether they had purchased those goods or not. So then the Best Buy management, they exerted a control here, that any good that any customer wants to return or exchange, he must produce a receipt of that good, or the payment receipt of that good one, only then that would be returned or exchanged. So that was the control that was set by the Best Buy. So why was that control set? Because they were not meeting their goals, right? They were falling short of their goals. So your goals, they are guidelines as to the standards that you have set, whether they are fine or you need to revise your standards. Then when you have to set your standards, you need to listen to your customers, right? So like the McDonald's, it launched its big extra after the deals that Burger King was producing, and the increased attractiveness of the customers towards the deals of the Burger King. McDonald's also launched its big extra in order to keep the demands of the customers in mind, and this product was also very popular. Although McDonald's management does not agree that they launched this product in response to the Burger King's product, but they launched it and it was a good success. So you need to listen to the customers when you are setting your standards, then what the customers want. Then you should determine that, you should set a benchmark for yourself, and you should determine that what should be benchmarked, right? And different companies, they identify their standards on the basis of the standards of the benchmarked companies. Like if I give you an example of an hospital, that how it can benchmark the hotel services, right? Because the admission process in a hospital for a new patient is similar to that of a tourist or a visitor in a hotel who also wants to book a room for 2-3 days or for a couple of days. So but it is done much faster in the hotels than it is done in the hospitals. It is a very laborious and time-taking process in the hospitals when a patient needs to be admitted to the hospital, where it should be very fast as well, right? But then in this case, how the hospital, it can benchmark another industry, another hotel in another industry, and then when it benchmarks another hotel in another industry, then it needs to spend some time and see carefully that what are the standards that have been set in the benchmarked company, how they have set them, what are their performance goals, what processes they are using, and how they are achieving those goals. Right, so you need to have a fair understanding of the processes that the benchmarked company is utilizing, and you need to benefit from that, and only then you can improve your performance and improve your standards, right? So you need to collect data on other companies' performance standards, and you need to identify companies against which you can benchmark your standards, right? Then there are certain comparisons to the standards that in the control process. First you need to set certain standards, and then you need to make a comparison to those standards. So the first step towards this comparison is that your quality, of course, it depends on the measurement and information system used, right? So unless and until you have a good measurement system of making a comparison between the actual performance and the standard performance, of course you're going to have some faulty readings or some faulty results. So you need to have a good system to measure or make a comparison between the actual and the set standards. I would like to give you an example of Regal Cinemas. Here, what they have implemented very tight controls in their system in such a way that if a box of paper drink, if a cup, it is misplaced, the theatre manager is charged full price of that paper drink cup, means that including the price of the coffee or tea, whatever. So it's charged the full price, right? So that is a kind of a penalty, that is a control mechanism in order to keep a check. So the information system that they use, or the computer system that they use, that is so control oriented, and that is so efficient that it identifies that where there is a lapse in the performance, right? So the system identifies whenever there are a certain number of cups, they are misplaced or they are lost or they are broken or whatever, and against that the manager is penalized, right? And it's not only that the system or the information system used by the Regal Cinemas that identifies only the lapses in the performance, but it also identifies where the performance of the managers is exceeding the expectations, right? So it gives both positive and negative feedback, right? It gives the exact report of the performance of the managers. If they are overperforming the standards or they're exceeding the expectations, then the Regal Cinemas they do positively reward the managers, and if it is the other way, then the managers are punished. So you need to have a good system, good information system that can identify, that can measure the that can measure the performance, right, or that can measure the outcomes, and against which the comparison can be made with the standards that have been set, right? Then we have the corrective action. Once you have some accurate system that can measure the performance, and then you can take the corrective action. And corrective action needs to be taken, of course, when there is a discrepancy between the actual performance and the one that was set. So when there is difference between the actual and perceived or expected, then you need to take certain corrective actions. So you need to first identify what the performance deviations are. And we know that if you don't have a good information system, if you don't have good control process, if you don't have good measures, then it would be very difficult to identify even the problems in certain instances. And that is where many companies make great losses, right? When they are unable to identify that what the actual problem is. Right, so there are a number of problems in a number of areas that keep going without the management's notice until the problems they become huge, and they turn into huge losses for the management or for the organization, right? So you first need to identify the performance deviations, then you need to analyze those deviations, right? And then in the third step, you need to develop and implement programs to collect them, right? So unless and until you identify the problems, you cannot develop and implement the programs to correct them. Now here we have the example of New York City Hotel for you, which is known for its first-class service. And what was happening here in this hotel was that they were making continuous errors of not charging the clients for the room service on account of the tea or anything that that is not included in the bed and breakfast menu, right? So anything extra other than that, like telephone charges, so when they were charging the customers, they were not including those telephone charges in that charge list or in the bill. So it was of course then coming on the company, and they were losing on this. So this is error. And also the other mistake that they were making was that they were if the two different clients, they were staying in the same room, they were sharing the room, then in that case also the separate charges for them, they were not being incurred, right? So the company identified this mistake, and they took corrective action to reduce this kind of errors, right? And they implemented some stricter controls, such as at the night before the checkout, like if the customer or the client has to check out tomorrow morning, then at the night today, the manager, he needs to make a complete list of the different utilities that the client has availed, and the different charges that the client needs to pay against those utilities, right? So that sheet needs to be completed in the night, and then there needs to be counter checks of those different charges that the clients needs to be charged to. And this is how they implemented stricter controls at different levels, and they reduced these errors, and they saved a lot of money on this, and they increased their profitability. Then we have an example, as a next step to this control process, we see that it is a very dynamic and cybernetic process, right? So by dynamic process, we means that it is not a one-point process control, right? It's not that you you first need to set you set standards, then there is actual performance, then there is desired performance, and then there is develop program for corrective action, right? So it's basically, if you look at the this figure here, you will see that it is not a one-step process, that you have to take certain measures or you have to take certain steps at one point in time. Like when the it is a continuous process. So you start off with setting your standards, then you measure your performance, then you compare your performance with the standards, you identify the deviations, you analyze those deviations, then you develop program for corrective action, then you implement the program for corrective action, then you after implementing that program for corrective action, then you again see the desired performance and the actual performance, and then you again set standards and again measure performance. So it is a continuous cycle, right? Then we see that here I have for you an example of Pepsi. What Pepsi does is that it basically gives its advertisements in the most famous or the popular shows on the TV, right? So when the advertisement of Pepsi starts on these different TV shows, there are 70 people at the same time who sit and analyze when the Pepsi advertisement is on, that how is the response to the Pepsi's advertisement, that how many people they are watching that advertisement, how many customers are watching that advertisement, and out of those, what are the strategic customers of the company, and who are the strategic, and if whether the strategic customers are listening or their target market is listening to those advertisements or not, or they're watching those TV shows and listening to those advertisements or not, or whether they need to give their ads to some other shows, etc. So there are 70 people who are sitting simultaneously in order to see that how and whom they have to target and where they have to target and what corrective action they need to take. So if there they see that their target market is not being hit here, then they change their targets, right, and they move to some other shows or somewhere they have to place their ads, or they change their advertising policy. So it is a continuous process. Control is a continuous process. You need to be on a checkout continuously, right? When you have taken corrective actions, you again need to see that how those corrective actions are working, right? You again need to see that how your performance is changing now, right? And if your performance is falling on the standards, and if you reduce or lose your corrective your controls, then it may be that your performance again there becomes a deviation in your performance, right? So you continuously need to see your goals. You continuously need to maybe sometimes adapt your goals according to the changes in the market and the external environment, and accordingly your standards might change, right? And accordingly your performance expectations might change, your actual performance needs to be changed, the corrective actions or the controls that you are applying, they may change or they may need to be changed. So as I told you that it is there are different types of the control. One is the feedback, the other one is the concurrent, and the other one is the feed forward. So under feedback control, what happens is that you are of course you get the information after the performance has occurred, right, or after the performance deficiencies have occurred. Only then you are gathering the information, right? So this means that under the feedback process, sometimes there are certain performance deficiencies that can be very fatal, or that can be very major, or that can be very drastic for the company, right? But again, as per this process, you gather the information after maybe about 1 year or 6 months or so after the performance lapses, right? Under the concurrent control, what happens is that you gather the information about the performance deficiencies as they occur. So it is basically trying to reduce the lapse between the performance deficiencies and the corrective action that needs to be taken, right? So you try to keep it simultaneous, right? Under the feed forward process, it is basically really proactive approach of the managers, right? And herein you are relying not on the outputs for the feedback, but you're more concentrating on the inputs. You're concentrating on the input so that the performance deficiencies, they do not occur in the first place, right? So under the feedback control, what is happening is that the deficiencies have occurred, and now you are trying to control those deficiencies. Under the concurrent, you are trying to keep the process simultaneous, that so that the gap between the deficiency, the deficiency gap and the feedback gap, that is controlled, and you can try to minimize your mistakes, right? And in the feed forward process, you are trying the deficiencies not to occur in the first place. You are trying to design your processes and systems in a way. So is control necessary or possible? That is a question. That is an important question. Is it necessary or is it possible? Because in certain cases, control may not be possible at all, right? So, in certain cases, control may not be necessary at all, right? So whether the control is necessary or not, it can be a little subjective in certain situations, right? And as per the understanding of the certain managers, because every manager, as I told you earlier, he has his own style of management, right? And we'll be discussing more in detail about the leadership styles as well, that how the different leaders they control the different employees, right? How they use different strategies to control different employees as per their leadership style. So as per the leadership style, some leaders, they may use minimum controls, and some leaders may be very control oriented, right? So it can also, there are a number of factors, there are a number of organizational policies, there can be a number of departmental differences as well, and as per that, some organizations, and they can be more control oriented and some can be less control oriented. So the ones that are less control oriented may have this approach that instead of controlling the employees, try to autonomize them and try to give them more discretion and more power, and try to let them be accountable for their own results, or let the feeling of responsibility and accountability come in them, right? Let them play, give them certain boundaries and let them play, so they can have this kind of approach as well, right? So whether the control is necessary or not, you need to really evaluate it. For if I give you an example of a company wherein in a company there was a nearby Starbucks, you know, it's a very international coffee store, coffee providers, right? They basically, it's just an example, a hypothetical example. If they open their outlet near a company, right, and the employees of the company in their coffee break, instead of taking their coffee in the office, from the company's coffee machine, if they start going to outside and to the Starbucks coffee shop and taking coffee and drinking coffee there and then coming back, right? So of course that process would take much longer than taking the coffee in the company, right? So maybe that 15 minutes, then if you go outside, they turn into 20 or 25 minutes, right? So what should the manager do? Should the manager control this action of the employees or this behavior of the employees? Is it wrong if they are availing a little longer coffee break or not? So different people, they may have different opinions on this issue, right? Some may think that it's wrong when the company has said 15 minutes, it should be in 15 minutes, they should return within 15 minutes. And some of the managers, they might have the opinion that out of the 8 to 10 hours of work, even if they avail 15-20 minutes or 25 minutes of coffee break, even for 2 times or 3 times, that doesn't matter, right? So that can be truly refreshing for them to go outside the office, to go off-site and get refreshened up. They can have better ideas. They can come up with back with more fresh ideas. They can meet the different people. They can meet some of their customers as well. They can meet the potential customers as well. They can gather a number of information from those potential customers or from their current customers. They can get some feedback which can be useful for them, and things like that. So there are both there can be the positives and negatives of this, and there can be different views on whether this action of employees should be controlled or not, right? So you really need to think as a manager whether and how much control is necessary. Then you also need to see that if control is necessary, is it possible to control? So sometimes certain situations can also be created where control is necessary but it's not possible to control. Then what would you do? So then managers need to see what are the different options available to them if it's necessary to control but it's not possible to control, right? So let's see all these three different perspectives. First, we see that is more control necessary. We see that we say that there is control loss when a situation or a behavior in which in a situation in which the behavior and the work procedures, they do not conform to standards, right? So when of course you are unable to meet the standard that was given to you or that was set for you, or your procedures, they're falling short of the standards, then you see that there is a control loss. So here I have an example of Fidelity Investment Fund, which wrongly reported $1.2 billion loss as profit. So this is one of the very well-known, well-reputed investment fund company, Fidelity. What they did was that they wrongly reported $1.2 billion of the company's loss as their profits. So it turned their profits, they started showing up of $2.4 billion, right? Since it was a big mistake, so it was quickly identified and corrected by the company's accountants, and it did not lead into any losses for the company because the problem was quickly identified and corrected. But what happens was that this mistake and a similar mistake that was done or that occurred in this company a few months ago, that led to a very bad reputation of this company in the eyes of the investors specifically, right? So that happened because of the control loss. There was loose control, there were not tighter controls, and as a result this kind of errors, they were happening time and again. Although they did not incur any financial losses for the company, but they did incur the reputational losses for the company. Then we see that there are two aspects which are important when we have to decide whether control is necessary or not. First one is the degree of dependence. So degree of dependence is the extent to which a company needs a particular resource to accomplish its goals, right? So in other words, the manager or the company needs to see if a particular resource is critical for that company or not, right? So if that resource is, for example, a source of competitive advantage for that company, then that is a critical resource, right? So you cannot do without that resource, right? Or your standing won't remain the same without that resource, right? Or your major share or your major profit is coming from that resource through that, then that is a critical resource for you, right? So your degree of dependence on that resource is then much greater, right? So you need to really exercise control. So the control is necessary for that resource which is critical for the company, where you have greater degree of dependence. Here I have for you the example of the airlines that require most seats to be filled up before they fly, right? And it is in the airline industry, the number of seats that are filled, because as you understand that most of the costs, they are fixed of flight, right? They are fixed expenses. So if the maximum number of seats are filled, it means that the company is earning maximum revenues on that particular flight, right? But if there are lesser and lesser passengers, then your fixed costs, they will remain the same, right? But you have to incur the same costs for that flight, but your revenues will fall down, right? And as a result, your profitability will reduce, and if the passengers are really low, then you might enter into losses as well. right? So that is a critical resource. The number of passengers per flight, they are a critical resource, or they are for the airlines, and they have greatest degree of dependence on that resource, number of seats to be filled. So the companies, the airlines, for this they have established very strong, very sound computer systems or softwares, the management information systems, wherein the what happens is that they are basically under those systems, the reservations are done online in such a way that the fare price, it fluctuates in response to the demand from the potential passengers. So if there are more and more passengers, then the fare price will automatically fall, so it adjusts itself. So it falls, and if the passengers are lesser potential passengers or travelers, then the fare price will fall, and if the passengers are more, the fare price will rise, right? So this is what happens through this electronic system or the computerized system, right? So you must have noticed that sometimes you get the last minute flights, which are like the plane is going to take off in next one day, and before a day over at the night, then tomorrow the plane is going to fly, and day before that you are getting a ticket as low as a few dollars, right? And in some cases they are really in a few dollars. So this is what these computerized systems do. They respond to the changing demand by the customers. And in the beginning period, when there are a few weeks or months remaining in the flight, that flight price, the ticket is expensive, and then when it is about to fly, the last minute flights, you can get cheaper tickets. So and then we have this resource flow, right? That is the other area which will dictate to the managers on how much control is on whether the control is necessary or not, other than the resource dependence. So here it is the extent to which a company has easy access to critical resources, right? So what is the flow of those resources, right? So that is important. And how much is so if your certain resources are very critical for you, right? And their flow, how you can ensure the easy flow of the resources that are critical to you, or easy access of the resources that are critical to you. You might need to exercise certain controls to get easy access of those resources, right? So here I have for you an example of the drought that hit the San Antonio for almost 1 year. And as a result to that, the City Council of San Antonio, Texas, they put up the restrictions on the amount of water that could be used in the pools at home, or for the landscaping and for the watering of plants and gardening, etc. So they really restricted the amount of water that was to be used, right? So what were the consequences for certain companies for this, against this policy of City Council, which was about to be implemented? So Leif Zars is a very famous, is the owner of the very famous Gary's Pools in San Antonio. So he's basically into this pools business. He constructs these pools in the houses, right? So it was the biggest concern for him, because water was the critical resource for him. Because of course the demand for his pools, they would stand nowhere. That would significantly reduce if the City Council put restrictions on the use of water for the pools, right? So he knew that this restriction in the resource flow, it could be very critical for his company, and he might be even running out of business, right? So what did he do to ensure the flow of this critical resource? He came up with a very intelligent idea. He basically developed a few plastic shields that the households or the customers, they could put on their pools after using the pools. They could put them those shields on the pools, and that would significantly reduce the evaporation of water because of sun. So That was the idea that was put up by this man Leafzars, and this was the idea that was put in front of the city councils, that these shields, they would reduce the evaporation to a very great extent, right? So this is how we could ensure the speedy or the good flow of the critical resource for his business. Then there are certain, of course, costs of controls as well. When we talk about the possibility of controlling, right? When we first identify that, okay, it's important to control, right? Okay, that resource is really, you are dependent on that resource, right? That's why you need to control, right? And that resource is very critical for you. Then is it possible for you to control or not? So if there are certain costs that are attached to this control, right? One is the regulation costs, like the legal risks that are attached through liability insurance, etc. And these are specifically in the case of the pharmaceutical companies. In the US, those companies, they had to enter into this liability insurance, etc. And because of that, they significantly reduced the number of vaccinations that they were producing, right? So there can be a number of legal risks that can be attached to this control process, right? And then there can be a number of unintended consequences as well to this control process. So if you are introducing certain controls in your organization, there can be certain unintended consequences for those controls as well, such as in the case of the Delta Airlines, which is one of the very biggest and famous airlines of America. So what happens is that it attempted to reduce the cost per seat mile from 9.7 to 7.5%. Right, and it that was its target, right, to reduce its costs, and it actually reduced the costs. But how it reduced the costs? What it did was that it reduced the number of mechanics per gate. So previously there were every one mechanic for every gate from where the flight of Delta was to take off, right? So one mechanic per gate, right? But then they changed when they, in an attempt to reduce their costs, they reduced the number of mechanics to one mechanic per 3 gates, right? So of course the natural consequence of this was that the flights, they started getting delayed, right? So when one plane has to take off, but the mechanic is in another gate and busy in repairing another other plane, of course the plane in the other gate is going to the flight is going to be delayed there. So result was that this airline, it came on the last amongst the other domestic airlines in the list of timely arrivals. So it was the last one to arrive on time as a result of this control that they exercised in order to reduce the costs. So it has very important implications for management. When you are trying to control something, you need to see that what are the different costs which are associated with the control, and whether those costs are the benefits that you are getting, they are exceeding the costs that you have to bear or not, right? So you need to do this cost benefit analysis. If your costs of controlling, they are greater than the benefits that are coming out of that control, then that's fine. But if then you need to ask yourself that what you have to do, is there any alternative way that you have to take, or what, right? So in this case, the Delta, it needs to see that by arriving late, how it is being perceived by the customers, right? And how whether its customer ratio it has fallen, how the changes have occurred in the eyes of the customers, whether they are shifting to the other airlines or what's happening, right? So it needs to make certain analysis of the situation and then make its decision on what it has to do. So an other thing that you need to see when you are trying to exercise control is see the cybernetic feasibility, right? So which is the extent to which it is possible to implement each step in the control process, right? So is it possible to first to set standards, because in certain companies, certain nature of jobs is like that, you cannot set objective standards of performance, right? And then there you need to see that whether the control is possible or not. When the output is really subjective, then what kind of control you need to put on, and whether it is possible to put some control measures or not, right? And then how you will be going to make a comparison with the standards, right? And how the feedback process is going to be. So all the different steps, whether it's possible to implement all those steps, you need to see. So if a step it cannot be implemented, then control may not be possible, right? For example, in the case of the travel policy of companies, so normally the companies have the travel policy that when they have to, the clients, they have to do the official trips, then they need to get the tickets booked through the company. But many times, many employees, they are not doing that. They do the bookings online, they do the bookings themselves as per their own convenience, right? So here it's then difficult to control. So when control is not is necessary, but it is not possible to control, or it's difficult to control, then the companies can exercise quasi control. So one, they can reduce the dependence on the resource or product or service on which they were critically dependent. So they can choose to abandon or change their goals, and they can, when control over a critical resource is not possible, right? So when it's not possible to control a critical resource, one option that they are left with is that they reduce their dependence by changing their goals, right? So here I give you an example of PepsiCo, which will make you understand this point, that they started off with the three distinct businesses. One was this in drinks business, the most famous, the Pepsi, then the Mountain Dew, and the other one was the fast food business, amongst which they had the restaurants, Pizza Hut, KFC, and then they have the snack foods such as Frito-Lay. So when they diversified their resources and they put their resources into all these different kinds of businesses, they had to face very fierce competition from Coca-Cola, and they could not put as much of their own resources into the Pepsi to fight the competition with the Coca-Cola. So resultantly, what they did was that they reduced their dependence on the critical resources. So they put off some of their resources from the restaurants business, and they sold their restaurants for $11 billion, right? And they invested all that money mainly in Pepsi, right? In order to, because then they changed their strategic goals, right? So one option is that you change your strategic goal when you want to, it's difficult for you to control. Right, so this is the one way of control, that you change your strategic goals, you reduce your dependence. And the second way is that you restructure your dependence. So which is the exchange dependence on one critical resource for dependence on another resource. So here we can have the example of the private planes for commercial planes that can fly to 5,500 different airports instead of only 550 nationwide airports in case of commercial planes. So there are a number of advantages of restructuring dependence. The new critical resource, it may be more controllable, and it may not require any control at all, and the company may not need to change its goals as it has to when it is reducing its dependence on some critical goal, some critical resource. So there are different methods of control, such as the bureaucratic, the objective, the normative, the consultative, and self-control. So bureaucratic control, as you all would be familiar, it is more top-down, right? Where you have set policies, procedures, and through those policies and procedures which you have set for the employees, you influence their behavior and you control their the employees, right? So employees are often resistant to change because it is very inefficient and inflexible system, the bureaucratic system or the bureaucratic organizations. The objective control can also be used by the managers, right, where they basically try to control through the objective measures, right? And then they can also use the behavioral control, where they regulate the employees' actions and behaviors and not the output and not the objective, right? They are trying to control the employee behaviors because they know that certain kinds of behaviors will lead to certain kinds of outputs or performances. So they are controlling the employee behavior, and in the output control they are trying to control and measure the employee outputs and not the behaviors, right? So they are focusing on the outcomes. Normative control is when the company has certain established values and beliefs which are the guidelines for the employees on how they have to act in certain directions, and they are those norms and cultures of the organization and the company. They are basically the guidelines for the employees to act in certain ways, right? And the companies, they can also in certain cases use the stories to convince and their employees that in what ways they should behave, what are the desired ways of behaving. And in the concerted control, it's basically a group-based measure wherein this control is basically exercised in case of, like, we have the concept of the autonomous work group. So what is happening in those autonomous work groups is that they are operating without the managers. They set their own goals and the policies, the group goals, group policies, group strategies to achieve their targets, and that is how they their activities are controlled through group. Right, and the self-control is where all the employees, they are certain boundaries are set for all the employees, right? It is not an anarchy wherein there are no boundaries and everyone is free to do whatever he does, but there are certain boundaries, and within those boundaries all the employees, they are supposed to set their own policies, rules and procedures, and they are supposed to achieve their goals and to achieve their targets. So employees monitor their own progress. Then we have this balanced scorecard approach, which basically covers very comprehensively all the different perspectives on that an organization needs to look. So previously, organizations, they need to focus only on the financial ratios, on the financial aspect of whether the company is performing well or not, or where the control is necessary. But balanced scorecard approach says that it's not only the financial approach or the financial perspective, but the companies also need to look after the other perspectives, such as the customer perspective, the internal perspective, and the innovation and learning perspective, other than the financial perspective. And it needs to exercise the control in all these different directions, right? So under the financial perspective, as I told you, that it's through the balance sheets, it's through the income statements, the cash flow analysis is done, and different financial ratios such as the liquidity ratios, the profitability ratios, etc. They are calculated in order to arrive at the certain figures and in order to see the financial performance of the company. And on the basis of that, the control process is initiated, or the corrective actions are taken. Under the customer perspective, the company also needs to understand the customer defections, that is what is the rate at which the customers, they are leaving the company, and the managers, they need to understand that it's the rate at which if the existing customers, they leave the company, that is much more expensive, that is 5 times more expensive than for the company to earn a new customer. Right, so they need to understand this concept of customer defections, and they need to understand that they also need to exercise certain controls on the areas other than the financial area, on the customer defections area. So they can the customers who have left their company, they can take feedback from those customers, because they are the best people who will be giving you best feedback on why they left the company. The existing customers, they may not give you a good feedback even if they see some problems in your product, right? But it's those customers who have left, they will be giving you a good feedback on what were the problems with the product and how they perceive the other competitors' product better over their product, and how that can be improved, right? So then the company also needs to measure the quality. It also needs to see the internal perspective, what is the value of that product, how it is perceived in the eyes of the customers, how it is relative to the competitors' products or services, whether it is meeting the expectations of the clients, in how much time you are bringing your product to the market, what is the life cycle of your product, and things like that, right? And then of course the waste management, you need to have strategies for waste prevention and reduction, right? So you also need to have the innovation and the learning perspective is where you also need to see that how you are or your company is working, other than not only the controlling of the waste and the pollution, where how you're disposing of that waste, whether you are into recycling and reusing. Like the McDonald's, it started a very big McRecycle program under which it recycles the uses the recycled equipment, right? And what are your policies to minimize the waste production, right? And how you have to reuse that, how you have to treat the waste, how you have to dispose of the waste. You need to take all this into consideration, and you need to see that whether your company is innovating or not, how it is learning, how it is responding to the changes in the external environment, whether there are continuous improvements in the product. It's not only about the new product development, but also about the changes in or improvements in the existing product to stay in line. So it is all these different perspectives that the companies need to see when they're evaluating their performance. It's not only about the financial perspective, and that's what the balanced scorecard approach says, that it's also the customers, it's also the quality, it's also the innovation and learning, it's also the environmental perspective, it's also from the perspective of the employees, it's also from the financial ratios. So even if the company is not doing very good on the financial ratios, its market share is declining, but it might be that its customer base is really getting very strong, and it's getting sound, and the quality is improving, and then maybe in the next few years the company's profitability and shares, they will also increase. So in short-term profitability or the short-term ratios, they may indicate that the company is going bad, but the other indicators may indicate that in the long term the company is going to improve, right? So we need to consider all these different perspectives. So with this, we come to an end of today's lecture, wherein we discussed the control process in very much detail. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. I thank you all for your patient hearing. See you again. Allah Hafiz.